you're on.
All right, today we are going to begin with vaYiqra, chapter 16. We're going to start with verse 1 and just see how far we can get in this short amount of time we are allotted. That's Leviticus, for those of you who don't know. I picked up a new pair of glasses this week. They are the wrong prescription, so I apologize in advance for how rough this may be because I'm seeing two of everything, and it's better with my glasses off than it is with them on. It's much worse with them on, so it's just going to be what it is. Sorry about that. We're going to start off. I'm going to read the Hebrew for the first 10 verses. I think, see anyway how we could get past the first 10 in an hour's time anyway, so we'll do that, and then we'll get right into the teaching. There's some really good stuff here. We're going to answer questions that the sages cannot be answered. They say it can't be answered. The answer's right there in the sentence. Anyway, so we'll begin with verse 1. Vayadaber Yahweh el Moshe, Ahare mut Shnei b'nei Aharon karvatan lipnei Yahweh vayamuto. That's bad. Vayomer Yahweh el Moshe daber el Aharon ahicha ve'al. Get this out of the way so I can read. Yavo bechal et el hakodesh mi beit la parochet el penei hakaporet asher al haaron velo yamut ki be'anan era'e al hakaporet. Bezot Yavo Aharon el Hakodesh Befar ben Bakar le Chatat ve'ayil le'olah. Ke tonet vad Kodesh yi lebash u mich nese vad yiyu al besaro u ve'avav avnet. Bad Yachegor Uve mitz nefet bad zenof bigdei kodesh hem ve rahatz b'mayim et besaro ule vesham umeet adat b'nei Yisrael yikach shnei ha'seirim izim lechatat vechad leolah. Vehike riv Aharon et par ha-chatat asher lo vechiper ba'ado u ve'ad beto. Oh, beto, no, not that. Velakach et shnei seirei vehe'emim mid otam lipnei Yahweh petach ohel moed. Natan Aharon al Shnei Seirei Goralot Goral Echad La Yahweh Vegoral Echad La Azazel Vehike Riv Aharon et Hasair Asher ala Alav Hagoral La Yahweh ve'asahu chatat ve'hasair asher ala alav hagoral la'azazel ya'amad chai lipnei Yahweh lechaper alav leshalach oto la'azazel hamid bara. All right. So let's get into the story. I don't know if some of you may have caught it, but we're talking about this chapter starts off talking about the death of the two sons of Aharon. So wow, we just jumped from where we are to where we've been some time ago, and what's this have to do with the price of tea in China, right? Find out. So the story here, we're going to go back to chapter 10, verses 1 through 20, and I'm just going to read my translation as opposed to the Hebrew because we've already been through all of that. So my translation of these verses is, And Nadav and Avinu, the sons of Aharon, took each man his fire pan and placed in them fire and placed incense on them and drew near to the presence of Yahweh with an alien fire which they were not commanded. And fire came out from the presence of Yahweh and consumed them, and they died in the presence of Yahweh. And Moshe said to Aharon, "This is that which Yahweh has spoken, saying, with those who draw near to me, there will be holy. Before all the people, I will be glorified." And Aharon was silent. And Moshe called to Mishael and Elezaphan, the children of Uziel, the uncle of Aharon, and said to them, "Come, take up the bodies from the presence of the sanctuary." They call it the holy, but that's the sanctuary, to the outside of the camp. And they went near and lifted them up with their tunics to the outside of the camp, just as Moshe said. And Moshe said to Aharon, Eleazar, and Itamar, his, speaking of Aharon's sons, "Do not shave your heads nor tear your garments." Of course, it said, don't, how they put that, don't loose. Well, that's shave. Don't loose your hair, don't shave it, nor tear your garments, lest you, it says, and not you shall. So we would say in English, lest you die. The next word being die. So if I did a literal translation, it would say, and not shall you die, or and you shall not die. Maybe I'd say it that way. But it's lest you die. So don't do this, because if you do, you're probably going to die. And wrath come on all the Adah, all of the congregation, and your brothers, the whole house of Israel, because they mourned the burning which Yahweh burned. In other words, you're not supposed to mourn these two. And you shall not go out of the entrance of the Ohel Moed, that's the tent of meetings, lest you die, because of the anointing oil of Yahweh which is on you. And they did according to the word of Moshe. And Yahweh spoke to Aharon, saying, "You shall not drink wine nor strong drink, you and your children, when you go into the Ohel Moed, into the tent of meetings, lest you die." In other words, if you drink strong drink or wine, you'll probably die if you go into the tent of meetings. This is him and all of the priests who come after him. So this is a very harsh rule for them. A statute forever to your generations. And make separation between the holy and between the unholy, and between the impure and between the pure. I'm going to stop here and back up a second. And make separation between the holy and between the unholy, and between the pure, impure, and the pure. So let's go back up here and look at a verse that we went through toward the beginning. In verse 3, and Moshe said to Aharon, "This is that which Yahweh has spoken, saying, with those who draw near to me, there will be holiness," i.e., they will separate between the holy and the unholy, the pure and the impure. And before the faces all the people, I will be glorified. And Aharon was silent. Well, what is the this he's talking about? Well, and fire came out from the presence of Yahweh and consumed them. So those who say we can't not know what strange fire is, oh, yes, we can. Verse 1, and Nadab and Avinu, the sons of Aharon, took each man his fire pan and placed in them fire and placed incense on them and drew near to the presence of Yahweh with in the English usually says strange, I wrote alien, fire which they were not commanded, which they were not commanded. They mix the impure with the pure, the unholy with the holy, and it cost them their lives. So we know what strange fire is. It's mixing the holy with the unholy, the pure with the impure. It is walking into the sanctuary of God and doing something that God has not commanded you to do. And we're talking ceremonially here. Not that you walked in and gave somebody $100 because you knew that. No, I'm not talking about that sort of thing. I'm talking about the ceremonial and who these people are, and they've been anointed with the oil. It's been poured on their head, and it went from the heads all the way down to the feet. These people knew what their job was, and they went in there and did something that was not within their job requirements, i.e., God had not commanded that particular thing to be done. Why? Well, probably because they got a little too big for their own pants. They probably thought, oh, look what we can do. We can go into the presence of God and do all of this. And, it's all speculatory, but we do know that they mixed the unclean with the clean and the unholy with the holy, and then that they basically made up a new procedure and followed it through, and it cost them their lives. That's bringing strange fire. It's that simple. All right, so let me go back down to verse 11. And teach the children of Israel all the statutes which Yahweh has spoken to them through Moshe. It says in the hand of Moshe, literally, but that means it came through Moses, if you want to call him that. And Moshe spoke to Aharon and to Eleazar and to Ithamar and the rest of his, speaking of Aaron's children, that means all the rest of the priests. That's what it means by his children. That means all the rest of the priests, not to his other, not to his biological children, his children in the priesthood. Goes on, take the rest of the sacrifice of fire to Yahweh and eat it with unleavened bread near the altar, for it is very holy. It says Kodesh Kadashim. And a lot of people have heard that. Oh, that's the Holy of Holies. Okay. That word's used, that phrase, if you will, is used for a lot of different things. And in this case, when they say Kodesh Kadashim, and they're not talking about what you think of as the Holy of Holies, we write very holy, because that's what they mean by it. Verse 13, and you shall eat in the holy place, for it is your statute, and it is a statute for your children. For from the fire of Yahweh I have commanded it. And the breast of the wave offering and the thigh of the heave offering you shall eat in the pure place, you and your children, daughters with you. In other words, you and your children being the priests and their wives with you, for your statute and your children's statute given from the peace says offering. Remember, peace is always in plural in regard to the offerings. It's never a peace offering. It's a peace says offering. Put an S after peace, which doesn't make sense in English. Perfect sense in Hebrew. For the children of Israel. This is why you do this in the holy place. It's for the children of Israel. Why? Because it's part of their covering. It goes on. The thigh of the heave offering and the breast of the wave offering on the burnt offering of the fats for a wave offering you shall wave before Yahweh. And it will be to you and to your children with you for a statute forever. Yahweh has commanded. And Moshe diligently sought, it says sought. That means he diligently sought a hairy goat for the sin offering, and behold, it burnt, and he was angry with Eleazar. In other words, it was cooked. And Eleazar and with Ithamar, the sons of Aharon, remained, saying, why haven't you eaten the sin offering in the holy place? For it is very holy. It is Kodesh Kadashim. It was given to you to lift away the iniquity of the Adah, of the entire congregation. for a covering over them in the presence of Yahweh. Behold, the blood of it was not brought into the holy place. You should have eaten it as I commanded. And Aharon spoke to Moshe, behold, this day they brought their sin offering and their burnt offerings before Yahweh, and these things have befallen me. And this day I have eaten the sin offering. See, Moshe thought he hadn't, but he had. This is good in the eyes of Yahweh. In other words, I'm square with God. I did what I was told. And Moshe listened, and it was good in his eyes. It was good in his eyes because Aharon assured Moshe that he had in fact done what he was commanded. There was obviously a lot of leftover. That's the point. Okay, so we get to verse 1 finally. In a very, very literal English, it would say something along the lines of, and he spoke Yahweh to Moshe after dead two children, Aharon, in approached them, two faces Yahweh, and he died they. Okay, you should get, that's what we've been talking about, right? So I brought up the previous telling of the story so that we knew the story for sure because it's being brought back up, and there's a reason for that. So he spoke, and this is the setting in the row, ranging in order. These are not just, I'm just kind of thinking and throwing stuff out there words. These are well thought out words. These are well placed words. Yahweh, of course, said these well placed words to Moshe. Ahare, after moot, it's a moot point. That's a dead issue. Moot, that's the Hebrew word for dead. So if you have ever said that's a moot point, you've been speaking a little Hebrew here and there. After Shnei B'nai, after his two children of Aharon, of course, approached, after they came near to the face of God, Lipnei, to the face of God, it says his proper name, and they died. So we're bringing up something that it took place some time ago, but we're bringing it back up. So my translation's going to sound real similar here. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe after the death of Aharon's two sons, when they came near to the presence of Yahweh, and they died. Many of the sages... There's a goat in front of my... I didn't even notice that while ago. We probably better go back over there. Okay. Sorry. We have a goat skin that's the hairy goat that we're talking about. I may have to go over there and grab that before it's over with, but it's literally in front of the screen. I didn't realize that. Anyway, many of the sages asked the question, why did God bring the death of Aharon's sons back up? As you can imagine, many ideas were put forth. Nachmanides wrote that this portion of the Torah must have been picking back up on the day after the two brothers were killed. His argument was that Aharon was too overwhelmed with grief for any time to have passed. Pretty good argument if you're looking at everything literally. Grammatically speaking, as we have learned from Umberto David Moshe Casuto, a former professor at the Hebrew University, has passed on since. From Hebrew text at that point in time, where we are right now in this point in time in Jewish history, if you will, followed associative, not chronological order. Does anybody remember that? Raise your hand. Oh, I can't see any of you. Thus, Nachman is almost correct, but for the wrong reason. Nachman's idea that this is the day after may also be based on the words after the death, right? It says after the death right there. So it's like, well, it must be the day after. However, we do not know just how long after the death it was. Could have been 20 years after the death. It wouldn't have been, but it could have been. Just saying after doesn't mean that it happened the next day. Doesn't mean that it happened seconds later. We're living after those events. You follow what I'm saying? So there's no suggestion here of how long after. So Nachman doesn't have a very strong argument. However, we do know just how long. I have no idea what I was going to say. Thus, Nachman's argument is only speculative. Let me say it that. Let me say that instead. Truthfully, it is not likely that we are literally picking up from the day after the deaths. It's not very likely. In short, the deaths of Aharon's two sons is brought up because of the event's association with the new subject. Did you follow that? It's not about the chronology. That idea did not, that concept did not exist uh, in the Hebrew text at that point in time. And so when you say so, when you see so and so begat so and so begat so and so begat so and so, you say, well, see, there's chronology. Well, you could argue somebody went and put that in afterwards. I don't think so. I know a lot of people say that, but that's baloney. That's not chronological. Go in and read who begat whom, begat whom, begat whom, right? You're going to find out that it's not in chronological order because you got dads begetting their own dad or sons begetting their dads. Go and look at it. It's not in chronological order, it's in associative order. It has to have an association. What we're about to talk about, this new subject from where we were, is associated to this, what happened, because of the mixing of the clean and the unclean, the pure and the impure. It's just an example that we've gone back to and are associating with a new thing. That's all it is. There is no chronology here. All right, so verse 2, very literally in English. And he said, Yahweh to Moshe, speak to Aharon, brother you, and not he come in all time to the holy from house to curtain to face the mercy seat that upon the chest, and not he die, for in cloud I will appear upon the mercy seat. This is a very strong connection to what happened to this man's sons. So that's, I mean, there's going to be several very strong connections, and you can understand why it is now being associated with that event, because you almost can understand what this says in that literal of a translation. So it's vaYomer, and he said. The primary idea is to bring forth, to shed light on the subject, that sort of thing. So this is really saying, and he explained. Might be a better way to put that. Who explained? Yahweh says his name right there. El Moshe, to Moshe. Daber, so speak. And these are going to be the words ranged in order. Think this out before you go and say what you're going to say. Think it out. Put it, make sure that you come across in a way that they can understand. That's why this word is used and not other words that could have been used. El to Aharon. Be careful how you say this. Why? Well, because this is going to be a touchy subject for him. He lost two sons in this, and we're bringing back, we're cutting open an old wound. So don't just go blabbing something. Don't just go in there and be harsh about, well, God said. Have a little compassion here. Hiha to your brother. And here's what he's going to say. Yavo. That's from Bo. Boa, come here. Bo, go there. To come and to go are the same word in Hebrew, especially the older Hebrew. The newer Hebrew, not so much, but at least as I understand it, not so much. I don't do modern Hebrew, though I can converse with some people in modern Hebrew if their dialect is Israeli. If their dialect is like that stuff from those guys that came to Israel from Russia, forget about it. Anyway, so I don't know for sure how that works in modern Hebrew, but in biblical Hebrew, to come was to go, and to go was to come, and it was the same word. Anyway, v'chal et, in all time, el, which is to hakodesh, to the holy. And you know what's holy, right? Holiness, what is holy, a holy thing? Something that is consecrated to God is considered holy by biblical standards. So, for instance, the Shabbat, that is consecrated to God. The Shabbat is a rest that is given to man. And again, we are created in his image. We are not like him. We're more like a shadowy image, if you will, because anyway, when God rested, that God didn't stop working. God didn't stop being God. God didn't stop doing God stuff. He rested from creation. In other words, he was finished with that part of God's stuff. I don't know what God does other than that. That's only one thing that God did, was create all that we know and don't know. The universe, God finished his creation process, because from this point on, it will go on creating itself. Humans will procreate, animals will procreate, and they will replenish. And the storms, the hurricanes and the fires and all that stuff that happen, what they call through nature, is not natural. It was designed to do that, because the lightning hits the forest catches on fire, it clears it out, new stuff grows up, and that's the cycle that's supposed to happen. The cold air the cold water comes down from the north, it gets in the south, hurricanes drag it back up. That's supposed to happen. That's not nature, that's by design. So everything in the earth, the universe expanding and all that, it's just replenishing itself. It's growing and continuing and all that kind of stuff. In fact, the universe could replenish itself without growing. The ball that we stand on, the earth, does not get any bigger, as far as I know. I've never heard that in science class, but it keeps replenishing itself. So the universe, literally, maybe it's not expanding. Maybe it's gone as far as it's going to go, and it's just going to, things collide and create new planets and create new solar systems and all of that, but all in the same place. That's a possibility. It's a theory that I just made up, but it is a possibility. So anyway, all I'm saying is everything has already been created. Everything's already doing what it's supposed to do. And the Sabbath, God, so when God rested, it's because the creation was complete. But that doesn't mean that he stopped working. And we need to get that, because the the Bible says God doesn't rest, he doesn't sleep, nor does he slumber. So God didn't stop doing God stuff. Whatever that is, we don't know. But he didn't stop doing that. He stopped creation. And so us being in his image, God gave us a day off to commemorate the day that God completed his work. And so our day off commemorates, if you will, the day that we've completed our work for the week, right? So it's a shadowy image of God, but it's not the same thing, because as a rule of thumb, we don't work. That's the whole idea. God didn't stop working. Anyway, so the things that are holy are set aside by God and for God. And God set aside the Sabbath, so we should celebrate the Sabbath. And the thing that's important to understand about what's holy is you're supposed to do it the same way every time. For it to be holy, it's consistent. So, for instance, the clothing that I wear, that you see me in every week, it's always the same thing, right? Well, of course it is. These are the clothes that are set aside for the work of God. I don't wear these clothes during the week for any other for anything else, because they're holy. They're just set aside. This things that you see around me are set aside for this congregational things that we do here. That therefore it's holy. Does it mean we can't make changes? Well, your clothes are going to wear out. You're going to have to replace them. The chairs will eventually wear out. The props will eventually wear out. So no, it's not that they can't be replaced. But it is that they can't be used for other things. So these things here will not be used for other things. And at the point they become, say, used for other things, we decide to change out the look or something like that, they can't come back. So I hope that you're getting this idea that it's got to be consistent. It has to be set aside for God or by God or both. Uh, and you can't just use it in some other way. All right, so me bait from the house, and generally when they say house, they're talking about the temple or in this case the tabernacle. But the house can also be your family. If it says Aharon and his house, they could be talking about the priesthood. But if it's more personal, it'd be Aharon and his actual wife and kids, right? So if you say Robert and his house, I don't have any claim to the priesthood, so that's going to be me and, in this case, my wife. Now, if our kids and grandkids all lived here with us like they did back in Bible days, that would include them as well. So you have to be careful what you're looking at when it says the house. All right, so this says La Parochet. Well, that's the curtain, that's the veil. So we're talking about the temple when we talk about the house. In this case, that's how you know. This is El Panay, before the faces, Ha Kaporet. That's the mercy seat. That's if you will, it's a place that the presence of God dwelled. It was the smoke, which I think this is going to say, right? That is your next word. That is upon Ha'aron. It's not Aharon, it's Ha'aron. So this is the chest. That's the mercy seat that's on the chest. In other words, the lid of the little box with the two angels. if you're Catholic, the two angels. Anyway, Yamut, he died ki because, and we're about to find out why. We're about to find out what caused these men to die. Be'anan. That's in cloud. In a cloud is the way we would say it. A cloud, something is veiled. A cloud is generally spoken of a large army. You could say the stars, the cloud of the stars. What would you be talking about? You'd be talking about the stars that are too many to number. So when you use the word cloud in Hebrew, it most often is speaking of a number that is so large it can't literally be numbered, like the grains of sand. Nobody can number those. There's too many. The stars in the heavens. Nobody can number those. Those are too many. And they use the word cloud for that indication. But here, it's a little more literal. And in that it means a cloud. This is era'es, that's from ra'ah. So I will appear in a cloud, literally in a cloud. Al ha-ka-poret, on the mercy seat. So here's my translation. And Yahweh said to Moshe, speak to Aharon your brother, that he not come in at any time he desires. I put the words in brackets, he desires. That he can't just come in anytime he wants to the sanctuary. They call it the holy. That's the sanctuary. From the Ohel Moed, from the tent of meetings, the house, they called it the house, but we're talking about the tent of meetings here, to the Parochet, to the curtain, that's before the Kaporet, the mercy seat, that is on the Aharon, the ark, so that he does not die like his sons. For I will appear in a cloud on the mercy seat. Do you see why his sons died? Were they being punished? We can compare this to chapter 10, verse 7. And you shall not go out of the entrance of the tent of meetings, lest you die, because, because of the anointing oil upon the anointing oil of Yahweh, which is on you. And they did according to the word of Moshe. So the answer to a couple of very difficult and much asked questions is actually answered here in the text. Why did Aaron's sons die? That's one of the questions. What is strange fire? We've kind of already covered that. Clearly, these two men went into the holy place at the wrong time, simply because they wanted to. And Aharon's sons went into the holy place at the wrong time. God's presence was there. That cloud that we just spoke of was there. And they died being in his presence. It was not a punishment. It was their being in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is why Aharon is being warned by God. Don't do what your sons did. They walked in, the cloud was on the mercy seat, therefore they died. You should not walk in when the cloud is on the mercy seat. You should only walk in when you're supposed to. Not according to men who lived 1,500 and 2,000 years later and just decided to start making stuff up, but according to the Word of God as written out by Moshe. Do it that way. Don't depend on the sages. They'll get you in trouble, is all I'm saying. In Leviticus 10:7, we're told that Aharon must not leave the tent. And here we're told that he is not allowed to go into the holy place, which essentially be the same thing. The Sephorno points out that verses 1 and 2 both say the Lord spoke to Moshe, and argue that he would not see these as two different communications, but as one. They are correct in that God spoke both verses 1 and 2 to Moshe at the same time. This is the same conversation, and that's what Sephorno is trying to say. Kasuto taught us that each time this phrase is used, it comprises a separate topic, and the Lord said to Moshe. You see, that happens in verse 1, and it happens in verse 2. Have you caught on to that yet? And how do you change the subject from one sentence to the other? That's not something you do in Hebrew. The subjects do not change. That's why the New Testament is so abundantly wrong at times, because the translators, is particularly from the Greek into the English, they saw things changing from, subjects changing from one verse to the next constantly. Hebrew's not written that way. Jews don't talk that way. Jews don't think that way from the biblical times. Modern Jews, probably they do, but not biblical Jews. They didn't write that way. They didn't think that way. Nothing was that way. So the stuff written in the first century should not be translated that way. That's all I'm saying. And this Forno brought this up because it says, and God said to Moshe, and it's in verse 1 and in verse 2. So if you think that this is just because of the changing of subjects, now you've got a subject changing to, one verse right after the other. So Kasuto taught us that each time this phrase is used, it comprises a separate topic. Topic 1 is do not go into the holy place at any time you want. That's topic 1. While topic 2 is here is what you do before, during, and after you enter the holy place. Again, the two topics are connected because of association, not chronology. So they're literally not two topics. They're part A, part B of the same topic. But they are separated this way because we're bringing something that happened some time ago back into the fold because of its association. God is associating the mistake that Aharon's sons made with the command that Aharon not do the same thing his sons did. That's the whole point, the whole reason why we would normally think, okay, well, verse 1's one chapter and verse 2's a new chapter, or maybe not chapter, but a subject, or maybe even a paragraph. This paragraph belongs here, that paragraph belongs there. I'm trying to find some way to connect it to English a little better, but probably subject is better. They're not two subjects. That's just point A and point B, if you will. There are two different things being spoken of here, but they both come from that same example. And I don't know. I feel like I just convoluted the whole thing. I haven't looked at time in a while. Okay, verse 3, very literal English. In this he come, Aharon, to the holy young bull, sun herd, to sin offering, and ram to burnt offering. You're going to like this one. Bezo Yavo. So in this he came. Aharon is the one they're speaking of. This is El, which means two, T-O. Ha Kodesh. So now he came to the holy. What's the holy? Well, that's the sanctuary. Befar, with a young bull. And then it says Ben, which is son. Oh, Bakar. So the son of the herd. So he took the bull from the herd. Le Chatat. Well, there's your one for a sin offering. And then the Ayil and a ram. Le Olah, for a burnt offering. That's all there is to this verse. So in this, Aharon will bring, or did bring, to the sanctuary a young bull from the herd for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. So it's real straightforward. It's real easy to understand. Here we learn that the Kohen Hagadol, that's the high priest, must first make a sacrifice for himself. And according to verse 6, also for his family. That's going to come up when we get there. Before he has to do this before he can make a sacrifice for the nation of Israel. He has to be purified first before the nation can be purified. So you can't have an unclean, unholy, godless man go in and make a sacrifice and think that that sacrifice is going to cover Israel. Not going to happen. He has to have his covering before he can become the covering for the people, because he's the one that's the covering, not the animal. Another one of those big mistakes that the sages made. Many arguments as to why the high priest had to offer a bull and a goat have been offered over the years. But verse 6 says, a covering for his house, his family. Now, that, saying that in verse 6 makes it clear that the reason for the bull is because the high priest had to feed his entire family. Also, there would not have been enough meat for all of the high priests, right? Just one bull one bull and one ram. You're going to feed several thousand several thousand priests, because that's one of the arguments. Let's see, was it Rashi? Rashi thought that the word for his house meant that the sacrifice was for Aharon and all the other priests. So it was Rashi. This is a ludicrous idea, given that the tabernacle or the temple is God's house, not Aharon's house. You follow what I'm saying here? It's a dumb argument, a very dumb, not well thought out argument. So his house is his family, because the arguments just went on and flipping on about why it had to be this cow and why the goat. And Aharon's sins are much worse than the people's, because all the people's sins are on Aharon, and he's got there's more expected from him, and his penalty is harder, and and yet if they'd read verse 6 in Hebrew, which I do not think they did, they would have realized that there was a bull and a ram involved in this, because that's how much meat it would take to feed his immediate family. That's all there is to that. It's not that it has to be a cow and a ram every time. It's that you have to feed your whole family. So if you have a lot bigger family than Aharon has, and you've been inaugurated as the high priest over Israel, you better have enough to feed your whole family. And don't listen to the sages, because they're, in your case, dead wrong, Mr. High Priest. Just saying, just throwing that out there. So the answers so far to all of these questions that the sages said we would never know the answer to are actually written right in the text. That we do have the answers, and they're simple. See, if you're not catching the simple, you're not reading it right. And that was what the sages, that's a mistake they made. They tried to make everything so complicated, and it's not complicated. God didn't write this book for the what's that guy's for the Einsteins of the world. He wrote them for the everyday people like us, so that we could get something out of it. And every once in a while I make it too hard to understand. I realize that, and I'm not doing that on purpose. But when you get a guy who's, as I like to say, dumb as a mud fence in a rainforest, well, sometimes I don't make it so easy to understand. But hopefully you guys are getting this. If you didn't the first time, go back and watch it a couple times. You'll be able to see that these are simple answers. It's easy to figure out why the bull was there, because it said he had to feed his family. It doesn't have anything to do with his sin or Israel's sin or any of that. It just means that he has to have a covering, and that the cost of that covering is however much it's going to take to feed his family. Not the priests, the opposite priests, when there's thousands of them. That's not enough meat. Anyway, verse 4. I do believe we have time for this. It says, tunic alone holy he put on, and underwear linen be they upon fleshy, and with belt alone he bind, and with turban alone he wrapped. Garments holy they, and wash in waters fleshy, and wear them. This is kind of where I get the whole only wearing this stuff on service to the Lord. All right, so ketonet, that's a tunic, an inner garment next to the skin, also worn by women, generally with sleeves coming down to the knees, rarely to the ankles, from the idea of covering and clothing. Okay, you guys ever seen one of those movies from the 1800s and seen guys that are, they're awakened from a deep sleep and they jump up out of bed and they have a onesie on? That's what I'm talking about here. They probably didn't have pant legs sewed into them at the time. They could have, but I've never seen any evidence of that. It just seems like it was more like a long robe or a dress, whichever way you want to look at it. But men and women both wore these. It wasn't just, it's underclothing. It's a very long t-shirt, because it was essentially a onesie. So anyway, he's supposed to put on his onesie, and here, this is important. Bod, this next word, bod, we translate it in English as alone or separate, and that's what's important here. It's separation, something separated. It's a part, it's a portion, it's a piece of the outfit, if you will. But it's separate, it's separated. It's not the underclothing that you're going to wear during the week. It's something that's separated for the use of God and God alone. Then it says Kodesh. And that's almost what holy means, right? That's what Kodesh is. It's holy, it's set apart, it's separated, it's for that one and only use, and it's used the same way every time. They almost say the same thing with both words. This is yilebash, and he'll put on umichnase. Somebody wrote breeches in one of their Bible translations, and that translation of that Bible is called the Breeches Bible. Because I guess they didn't want to say underwear. But yeah, these are boxers. I don't think anyone's ever found anything that old in an archaeological dig. If they have, I haven't seen or read it. But my guess would be more like boxers. Who knows? And it says vod, so it's got to be made of linen. Yiyu, and they will be al, which is on, besaro, on his flesh. Boy, the sages said some really gross stuff about this, and wow, were they ever wrong? He's going to be wearing them. That's all they mean by that. It has nothing to do with gross stuff. It says u ve'avnet, and a belt, bod, that is separate, that's used only for this, so you can't use the belt you wear every day. Ya chegor, he'll bind with a belt, is what it's saying. Uve meets nefet, and a turban. We don't actually know what that looks like. Best, probably it's just like the turban that if you go to New York and get in a taxi cab, and you see one of those guys with a turban on his head, that's probably exactly what it looked like. That came from Jewish culture. It has trickled down into other cultures, and the Jews don't even wear them anymore. But there was a time when this was worn in Jewish culture. And if you don't believe me, just go look up on Wikipedia a image of Josephus. He has one on his head, and the most famous image of him. Just saying, just throwing that out there. And then it says bod, because let's see what we were talking about, with the turban that has to be set aside for this purpose. It can't be the one you wear when you're driving your taxi. It's got to be the one you only wear during the sacrifice, well, during your work for God. It says ye zenof, and that's to wrap big days. So you got to be wrapped with garments. And of course, they're going to be referring to the garments of the high priest in this case, because that's who they're talking to. Kodesh, the holy garments. The rachats, and before you do all that, take a bath. You need to be clean. You need to be zestfully clean. Ba mayin, you got to be washed in water. Besaro, your flesh has to be washed in water. And remember, the order is proper, and we do everything backwards, so that comes after instead of before, but that's what they mean by that. So you're going to take these things and you're going to wear them. So then we have, and he will put on a holy linen tunic and linen underwear on his flesh, and he'll put those on his body. And he will be bound with a linen belt, and he will wind a linen turban. We're assuming that goes on your head because that's what it is. It doesn't say that, but that's what they mean by that. These are holy garments. Therefore, he will bathe his flesh in water and put them on, or then put them on. And then are the same thing in Hebrew. So, Bible Hebrew. I don't know about modern. So you get the idea. God's laying out exactly what he's supposed to be wearing, and the fact that he has to be bathed. And from this verse, I do this. I take a shower, and then I put on this outfit, and you see me in it every week, and that's why. I am not the high priest. I am not trying to do the office of the high priest. We do not have a ark And the smoke is not back there. I got a fireplace instead. As close as we get, I am not trying to be the high priest, but I am trying to live out the whole law. And so since I am the one who teaches you the law, as the priest was just told he has to do, I'm trying to fulfill all of these things as best I can. Not trying to fulfill the position, not trying to pretend that I'm something I'm not. I am not the high priest. I will never be the high priest. That is not in my cards. So I do have apparently Levitical blood in my body, but that does not mean I'm qualified. All right. Looks like I'm running out of, I got 4 minutes over here. Let's see. All right, let me sum up with this. Let me get my little points across. I want to compare that to chapter 8, verse 7, which says, and Moshe placed on him, speaking of Aharon, the tunic, and fastened it with a belt, and dressed him with a robe, and placed on him the ephod, that's the vest, and he restrained the ephod with a belt and bound it to him. So the ephod's the only thing that's not being mentioned at this point. Why? Well, probably because they already know that. We can also compare Exodus 29:5. And you take the garments and you clothe Aaron and the tunic and the robe and the ephod, which is the vest, and the hoshen, which is the breastplate, and restrain it, the breastplate, with the belt of the ephod. Exodus chapter 28 and 39 lay out 8 specific pieces to the outfit of the Kohen Haggadah, of the high priest. It has been pointed out by many over the ages that sandals for the feet were never spoken of in connection with the Kohen Haggadah's clothing. Never. Speculation follows that the Kohen were to be barefooted when they carried out their duties because the place in which they stood was holy ground, in obvious reference to Moshe at the bush. I like this thinking, but the Bible doesn't actually say anything about this, thus it is still speculation. The actual reason is probably more practical. Blood would have been all over the floor, and anything on the feet of the priest would have soaked up the blood. Washing the feet would have been quicker and easier. Just throwing it out there, just not trying to make something that's not something. In Exodus 28:39, and you will embroider linen for the tunic, and you will make linen turbans and belts, and they will be made of needlework. Kusuto wrote, worked in a pattern of checkers, after the style still usual today of tablecloths and napkins. For this reason, the tunic is called in Exodus 28:4 a tunic of checkerwork. Apparently, this was the customary way of making stately tunics. And you still see Arabs doing this to this day. They stole that from the Jews. Kusuto also wrote, the head covering consisted of a long kerchief, which could be wrapped and wound round the head so as to give it a high and majestic shape. Furthermore, and you shall make a sash, a belt, fitted over the tunic beneath the robe. Speaking of Leviticus 8:7, this sash shall be the work of the embroiderer. Further, on Exodus 39:29, it is stated that it was made like the ephod and the pouch. Remember the pouch you got the 2 stones in? Of fine twined linen and deep violet and dark red and scarlet wool. Thus, its manufacturer was similar to that of the screen for the doorway of the tabernacle. Kusuto also wrote, the vestments of the other priests were to be like the garments of Aharon mentioned at the end in Exodus 28:39. Most likely, they were to be simpler. That's speculation, though. I have run out of time, obviously. I pushed as far as I could. Shalom, shalom, y'all.
The blessing, vaYiqra. Yavarecha Yahweh v'yish mecha. Ya'er Yahweh panai v'lecha v'hunecha. Yisa Yahweh panai v'lecha v'yasim lecha shalom. And in English, may Yahweh cause you to lie down so that you may rest. May he touch and caress you. May he prepare you for what is ahead. May he watch over you. May he keep you from harm. May he cause goodness to grow in you and take away the bad. May he arrange your life and cause you to flourish. May he cheer you up and gladden your heart. May he cause his light to shine through you. May he show you tenderness, favor, and love in his presence. May he show you kindness and be delicate towards you. May he show you his generosity, mercy, compassion, and desire for you as it comes forth from the depths of his soul. May he lift you out of your pit and deliver you from the things that hold you prisoner. May he draw you to his chest and cast his eyes on yours. May he show you his love and desire for you as he cradles you in his arms. May he bear your punishment and pardon you of your sin. May he take you for his bride. May he establish a foundation in you. May he place his name on your heart and mind and make your body his temple. May you be his treasure. May you always be on his mind. May he draw you near and comfort you when you are afraid. May he assure you there is nothing to fear because he is with you. May you and all that concerns you be at peace because he is your friend. Amen.